What if wealth had less to do with spreadsheets and more to do with how your mind works? What if getting rich isn't just about what you know, but how you behave when no one's watching? Stocks rise, markets fall, but emotions? They decide your future. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money isn't just a finance book. It's a mirror that shows you why smart people make dumb money decisions. Welcome to Thinknova, where we unlock not just your wallet, but the mind behind it. There was a time when money was just coins exchanged for cattle and cloth. It was simple, but over generations, as society evolved, so did its relationship with wealth. It was no longer just about what one had in the pocket. It became about what one believed. Money transformed into a mirror, reflecting not only a person's net worth, but also their mindset. In a small town lived a man named Ronald. He was not famous. He had never worn a suit or spoken on television. He worked as a janitor in the local high school for decades. He walked to work every day, his head down, his lunch packed in a paper bag. Neighbors barely noticed him. To most, Ronald was invisible. But when he passed away in his late 80s, the world paused. Ronald had left behind $8 million to charity, hospitals, and his local library. The town gasped. How did a janitor amass such fortune? The answer wasn't in what Ronald did. It was in how he thought. Ronald understood that building wealth wasn't about being brilliant. It was about being patient. He invested small amounts consistently, allowing time and compounding to work their magic. He never chased hot stocks. He never made emotional decisions. He lived below his means. He let compounding grow not just his money, but his peace. In the same country lived another man named Richard. He was a former tech executive, smart, charming, and ambitious. He made millions in his 20s. He drove fast cars, lived in a mansion, and threw grand parties. Everyone admired Richard. He was the symbol of success. Until one day, everything collapsed. A single risky investment wiped away his fortune. He had borrowed heavily, expecting gains to keep coming. When markets turned, so did his luck. His confidence had soared, but his humility hadn't kept up. And that was his downfall. Richard knew how to make money, but he didn't understand the psychology of keeping it. He believed intelligence guaranteed wealth, but it was behavior that ultimately decided fate. This contrast between Ronald and Richard wasn't rare. It was everywhere. Because money is not just math, it's psychology. It's the invisible force that drives decisions behind every purchase, every investment, every saving habit. And the most fascinating truth? People with no financial education often become wealthier than those with MBAs in finance. Why? Because managing money isn't just about knowledge. It's about how one behaves when no one is watching. It's about choices made every day. Housel explained that doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are, and a lot to do with how you behave. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because behavior is harder to learn than facts. Liberating because it means wealth is more accessible than we think. There's no entrance exam to being financially successful. No background check or certificate. Only decisions. Like when to save, how to spend, where to invest, and most importantly, when to do nothing. A man named James saved half of his income every month. He lived in a modest apartment, rode a bicycle, and cooked at home. His friends joked he was stingy. They spent lavishly, believing they deserved comfort now. James believed the future deserved preparation. Decades later, when his friends were still working, James had options. He could retire, he could travel, he could give. All because of small, consistent choices. Saving money, Housel wrote, is the gap between your ego and your income. If you earn a lot but feel the need to show it, you'll spend everything. If you earn modestly but resist the urge to impress others, you'll save. And that is power. True wealth is not seen. It's the cars not bought, the watches not worn, the Instagram posts never made. It's silent, invisible, but deeply powerful. We live in a world obsessed with display. We compare lives through curated windows. But comparison is the enemy of financial peace, because someone will always have more, or seem to. And in chasing their story, we risk losing ours. Housel reminded readers that every financial decision is made based on personal experience. If someone grew up in poverty, saving becomes instinct. If someone saw inflation ruin savings, they might avoid cash. If someone made a fortune in real estate, they might trust property forever. Money is emotional. We are shaped by what we've seen. No two people have the same financial past, so no two people will have the same financial behavior. This is why personal finance is so personal. There's no universal rule, only principles. And the most important? Be reasonable, not rational. Because humans are not computers. We make decisions with feelings. We panic. We dream. We fear. We hope. So it's better to aim for behavior that is good enough to work long-term, rather than perfect on paper. An investor might refuse to sell during a crash even if it makes sense mathematically. Why? Because holding on gives emotional stability, and that's priceless. Financial success is less about making great decisions, and more about avoiding terrible ones, like borrowing money to impress strangers, or selling investments during panic, or chasing returns beyond comfort level. Avoiding the big mistakes protects wealth more than any strategy. There was a family that inherited a large sum. They had never handled such money before. They celebrated by buying luxury cars, booking vacations, and upgrading their home. Within a few years, the money was gone. Because money doesn't change behavior, it reveals it. And if someone hasn't built the habits to manage a small amount, more money just increases risk, like giving a fast car to someone who never learned to drive. This is why Housel urged readers to respect the power of compounding. The most powerful force in finance isn't knowledge, it's time. $1 invested today isn't just $1 tomorrow. It could become 10 or 50, given enough time. But only if untouched, only if respected. People underestimate what can happen in 10 years, and overestimate what they can do in 1. Warren Buffett's fortune is admired worldwide. But what's less noticed is that over 95% of his wealth came after he turned 65. He started early. He stayed consistent. He let time work. That was his greatest skill, not stock picking, but patience. Endurance is underrated. And it's not about never making mistakes. It's about surviving long enough. Survival is the foundation of every strategy. Because if you stay in the game, compounding can do wonders. But if you take risks that blow you out, you never get to see the magic. A man once bet half his savings on a startup. He believed in it, but it failed. His future plans collapsed with it. He had to start over. Had he diversified, had he kept ego aside, he might have preserved the foundation. Optimism is necessary, but so is margin of safety, the room to be wrong, because the future is uncertain. No model, no prediction, no guru knows for sure. So the wise build cushions. They save not for what they expect, but for what they cannot foresee. A job loss, a medical bill, a global event. The unplanned shapes our lives more than the planned, and the ones who stay prepared win silently. Another key insight from Housel was that wealth is what you don't see. If someone drives a fancy car, they have the car, but they no longer have the money. Real wealth is the freedom not to worry, to choose your time, to walk away from nonsense, to wake up and decide your day. It's not about the size of your paycheck, it's about the control over your life. And that comes from saving, not spending, not showing off, but quietly choosing the long road. A road few celebrate, but many admire, because the outcome is peace. The next big idea is that people change. Their dreams change. Their needs evolve. What made sense at 25 might not at 45. So financial plans must be flexible. Rigid goals break under life's pressure, but adaptable strategies survive. Housel called it the power of room for error, a buffer against change. A pause before panic. Flexibility is strength. Just like a tree sways in wind, not because it's weak, but because it's wise. One of the most dangerous ideas in money is believing others know better. Copying someone else's plan without knowing their context is like wearing their shoes and wondering why they hurt. Every person is walking a different path, so the right choice is the one aligned with your values, your temperament, and your goals. Even if it looks boring, even if it's not popular. Because satisfaction matters more than appearance. Because wealth is a long game. And playing it well means knowing when to act, and when to wait, when to push, and when to pause. This was part 1 of the 4-part storytelling style summary of The Psychology of Money. In a small village nestled between hills and riverbanks, there was an old man named Hari. He had lived a full life. He was not rich by numbers, but he had never gone hungry. His children had studied, grown, and started families of their own. Every evening he sat on a stone bench outside his home, watching the sun set behind the hills. His neighbor once asked him how he managed to stay calm even during tough times. Hari smiled and said, "He never spent more than he earned. He never borrowed what he couldn't return. And he never believed that money alone brought peace." This simple wisdom echoed one of the most powerful ideas Housel shared: that contentment is a form of wealth. Wanting less is often more powerful than earning more, because no amount of income can satisfy a hungry ego, but a peaceful mind can make even little feel abundant. In cities, people often chase upgrades: a newer phone, a bigger house, a flashier vacation. The chase never ends. The bar keeps rising. Comparison fuels desire. Desire creates pressure, and pressure ruins peace. There was once a young woman named Maya. She worked in a high-paying corporate job. She wore designer clothes, ate at fancy restaurants, and posted perfect pictures online. But inside, she felt hollow. She was always chasing the next promotion, the next bonus, the next recognition. And when she didn't get it, she crumbled. She had everything, except satisfaction. She met an old friend one day, who worked as a teacher and lived a simple life. Maya asked her how she managed without wanting more. Her friend replied, she defined enough for herself, that she wasn't against growth, but she chose gratitude over greed. Housel emphasized that the hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. When enough is never enough, happiness becomes impossible. Money is a tool, not a measure of worth, not a scoreboard, just a means. And when one forgets this, life becomes a race with no finish line. There was also a man named Kunal who believed in quick wins. He followed the markets closely, jumping from one trend to another. Cryptocurrencies one week, biotech the next. He bragged about gains, but never shared losses. He was addicted to action. Stillness felt like failure. But over years, his portfolio went nowhere. Because noise drowned wisdom. Because movement replaced discipline. The truth was simple. Doing well with money is not about brilliance. It's about avoiding disaster. It's about steady gains, not dramatic wins. Slow wealth builds foundations. Fast money often fades. Just like bamboo takes years to grow roots before it shoots up, wealth takes time to form deeply. But in an impatient world, patience is seen as weakness. Housel argued that long-term thinking is a superpower. It's hard because emotions demand urgency, but the ones who wait often outperform. A farmer doesn't dig up seeds every day to check if they've sprouted. He waters them, waits, and trusts the process. So should investors. Another man, Suresh, retired comfortably even though he had never earned more than a modest salary. His secret was consistency. He invested small sums every month. Even during crashes, even during booms, he didn't time the market. He just stayed in it. And over decades, that became wealth. Because time in the market beats timing the market. Trying to predict is tempting, but being consistently present is more powerful. There's also the story of a woman named Lena. She inherited some money after her father's passing. Instead of spending, she created a small emergency fund. She called it her sleep fund. It wasn't large, but it was enough to buy peace. When her job became toxic, she quit without panic. When her car broke down, she didn't borrow. When her mother fell ill, she traveled without worry. That small cushion gave her confidence, freedom, security. Housel believed every household should treat savings not as an investment plan but as oxygen. Not everything saved needs to be invested. Some must be kept just to breathe easy, to sleep well, to avoid desperation, because desperation makes bad decisions, and good financial behavior comes from calm, not pressure. There was a businessman once who said he couldn't afford to stop working, not because he needed more money, but because he had built a lifestyle too expensive to pause. He had to keep running just to stay still. That's not wealth, that's captivity. Real wealth is the ability to stop, to choose, to say no, to walk away. Another insight Housel offered was about luck. Luck plays a larger role in success than people like to admit, and risk plays a bigger role in failure than people care to see. Bill Gates built Microsoft because he had access to a computer in high school in the 1970s. That was rare. His friend, Kent, also brilliant, didn't get the same exposure. He didn't become famous. Same effort, different environment. This doesn't mean Gates wasn't talented. It just means life is more complex than effort equals outcome. So, humility is necessary, and envy is useless, because outcomes are never fully in our control. The world is not fair, but recognizing this helps us avoid arrogance during success and despair during failure. If luck helped us rise, we must be grateful. If risk hurt us, we must forgive ourselves. Another powerful lesson was to avoid extreme reactions. The world loves drama. Headlines scream. Markets rise and fall. People panic. But wealth grows in silence, in restraint, in boring habits repeated daily. Not in excitement, not in headlines. There was a young investor who only checked his portfolio once a year. He believed that watching every move created anxiety, and anxiety ruined judgment. He focused on working, living, and letting the market do its work. Over the years, he missed none of the rallies, and all of the noise. His mental health stayed intact. His results were strong. He proved that doing less, if done right, is better than doing more with noise. People often confuse activity with progress, but sometimes, stepping back is the best move. A final lesson in this part was about respect. Money is emotional. Everyone has a story. So before judging others' financial decisions, it's important to remember their context is different. Someone might buy gold because their parents saw a currency collapse. Someone else may avoid stocks because of a bad experience. Both are valid in their world. There's no one way to wealth. Only many paths shaped by emotion, experience, and environment. Respecting this builds compassion. And in a world driven by money, compassion is rare. But it matters, because money is not just numbers, it's stories, it's behavior, it's human. And understanding that is the true beginning of wisdom. Thus ended the second chapter of this journey into the psychology of money. The mind, more than the wallet, decides fate. The heart, more than the markets, shapes peace. And the story of wealth is not about numbers, it's about choices. A quiet revolution happens in the mind before it shows in the bank account. That revolution begins when a person starts thinking long-term. In a world hungry for speed, delayed gratification is a lost art. But Housel emphasized that time is the most powerful lever in finance. Not effort, not even knowledge, just time. Imagine planting a seed and walking away. Years pass, storms come, droughts test it. But the seed, undisturbed, grows deep roots. Eventually, it becomes a tree, strong, reliable. It offers shade long after the planter has forgotten when it was sown. That is what compounding does. It rewards patience, silence, persistence. But the challenge is psychological, because rewards don't show up quickly. and the mind craves feedback. It asks, what have I got to show for it? The answer, for years, is often nothing. And that's when people give up. They sell early, they switch paths, they chase shiny things, because waiting feels like losing. But the truth? Most of compounding happens late, in the final stages. It's exponential, not linear. Missing the end is like quitting a marathon at mile 25. One more mile was the reward, yet most never get there, because impatience robs them. This is why Housel compared compounding to interest earned on interest. It works best when untouched. One of the most critical lessons he shared was about tail events. The idea that a small number of outcomes account for the majority of results. One blockbuster investment, one career-changing opportunity, one chance meeting, and suddenly, the entire trajectory changes. But people forget this. They assume every action should pay equally, that life is fair in contribution and return. But it's not. Outcomes follow a power law, meaning a few events will be responsible for most results. Amazon's early success funded a decade of failures. Buffett made over 99% of his wealth after age 50. Apple had hundreds of products, but a few changed history. So success, like wealth, isn't evenly distributed. It's driven by a few extremes. And that means surviving long enough to catch those rare wins matters more than constantly winning. You can be wrong most of the time and still do well, if your few rights are big enough. This is liberating, because it allows room for error, and it teaches humility. You don't have to be perfect, just persistent. The next idea is perhaps the most personal. That freedom is the ultimate dividend money pays. Not cars, not clothes, not vacations. Freedom. The ability to control your time, to choose what you do, when you do it, and with whom. To wake up and not be forced into things. To spend time with loved ones without checking a clock. To walk away from toxic places because you're not financially trapped. That is real wealth. And it is invisible. It doesn't show on Instagram. But it reflects in mental health, in relationships, in creativity, and peace. Housel believed that money's greatest value is its ability to give control over one's life. People think they want to be rich, but what they truly want is autonomy, a life designed by their values, not dictated by a boss, not pressured by peers, but crafted by personal choices. A man once shared how he lived modestly all his life. He never had luxury, but he never had anxiety either. He woke up without alarms. He spent his days reading, walking, and working on things he loved. And he called himself the richest man in his town, because freedom was his currency. And no number of dollars could replace that. On the flip side, Housel warned against chasing money for status. Status is a game with no finish line. You buy a luxury car, your neighbor buys two, you renovate your kitchen, someone builds a new house. It never ends, because status is competitive, and there's always someone higher. So if your joy depends on being ahead, you'll never rest, because someone will always appear to pass you. And that envy, that insecurity, becomes poison. Housel shared that when people are driven by status, they become slaves to other people's approval. They buy things they don't need, with money they don't have, to impress people they don't like. And in doing so, they trade peace for appearance. True wealth doesn't need applause. It's quiet, it's confident, it walks away from status games, and it wins silently. Another powerful insight is that people see the world not as it is, but as they are. Your past shapes your lens. If you grew up during inflation, you might distrust cash. If you saw markets crash, you might fear stocks. If your parents struggled, you might oversave. If you had privilege, you might underestimate risk. This diversity in financial background means people behave differently, not because they're irrational, but because they're human. This realization breeds empathy and humility, because your logic might not be universal. It might just be yours. So before judging someone's financial choices, ask what they've been through. what they fear, what they value. There's more wisdom in understanding than in mocking. In finance, there are no heroes, only humans, trying to do their best with the tools they have. The next lesson is subtle but deep, that we often underestimate how much change lies ahead. People assume their future selves will want what their present selves desire. But time changes dreams. A job that excites you at 25 might drain you at 45. A lifestyle you chase today might bore you tomorrow. So locking yourself into rigid financial plans is risky. Instead, embrace flexibility. Create a plan that works for who you are now, but leave room to pivot, to evolve, to pause. Housel called this the magic of options. Having choices, not being stuck, not being owned by your past decisions. Because life isn't linear, it zigzags, and your finances should be able to dance with it. This is why saving is more than numbers. It's emotional insurance. It buys time to think, to adjust, to say no. A woman named Priya once built her life around a single job. It paid well. She built her world around it. One day the company folded. She panicked. She had never built options. Her expenses had no flexibility. Her identity had no space. And her peace shattered. Had she saved more, diversified her skills, or questioned the certainty, she could have responded, not reacted. Because the biggest risk is assuming risk doesn't exist. One final reflection from this part is the power of enough. A man once climbed the corporate ladder to the top. He had wealth, fame, influence. But he kept chasing more. Eventually, one deal went wrong. He lost everything. Had he stopped chasing, he could have preserved peace. But he didn't know where to stop. Enough is a boundary. It's a personal definition. And those who define it win. Because they stop running and start living. They invest not just in stocks, but in life. They spend time, not just money. They value memories over material. And in doing so, they become wealthy in the truest sense. Thus ends the third chapter in the journey through the psychology of money. A journey not through markets, but through the mind. In the final stretch of this journey into the psychology of money, one truth becomes clear. The battle isn't in the economy. It's in the mind. The decisions that shape wealth are not made in boardrooms. They are made in moments, in grocery stores, on late nights staring at bills, in split seconds when fear and greed wrestle inside us. Housel brought attention to the idea that being wealthy and feeling wealthy are not the same. Wealth is what you don't see. It's unspent. It's silent. Feeling wealthy, however, is emotional. It's rooted in security, confidence, and trust in your future. People often assume that more money will bring that feeling. But that's a trap. Because if your sense of peace depends on a number, it will forever feel one step away. True financial peace comes from internal clarity, knowing what matters, what you can control, and what you can let go. There was a retired couple, Arvind and Radha. They had saved diligently. They lived in a small house, grew vegetables in their backyard, and traveled occasionally. Their children often asked them why they didn't move to a bigger home or buy a new car. Arvind would smile and say they had all they needed: peace, time, health, and no one to impress. They had enough, and they had no desire to complicate it. Contrast that with another man, Vikram, who earned 5 times more during his working years. He owned properties, drove luxury cars, and attended every social event. Yet he admitted he felt insecure about retirement. His expenses were large, his expectations larger, and the peace he longed for stayed out of reach. Because it wasn't money he lacked, it was boundaries. One of the most empowering ideas Housel shared is that wealth is what you don't spend, and saving is the foundation of power. Yet saving isn't always intuitive. People ask, save for what? For retirement? For a house? For college? Housel said, save for the unknown, for the surprises, for the moments life throws a curveball. Because it will. And when it does, savings transform panic into options. A young woman named Tara once lost her job unexpectedly. She didn't panic. She had 6 months of expenses saved. That gave her time to reflect, to apply mindfully, to say no to bad offers. Eventually, she found a role she loved more, all because she could afford to wait. That is the quiet strength savings bring. It's not about numbers, it's about control. Another crucial insight was that past success doesn't guarantee future outcomes. People often assume what worked before will work again. But the world changes. Markets evolve, technology disrupts, and clinging to the past can be dangerous. So the wise keep learning. They adapt. They test. They prepare for what they don't yet understand. Flexibility is the real hedge against uncertainty. It doesn't guarantee success, but it increases survival. And survival is the foundation of wealth. Because if you stay in the game, good things eventually happen. But if you take one bet too far, the game ends, and nothing compounds after that. There was an investor who had great instincts. He rode market booms perfectly, but in trying to time a crash, he sold everything. The market dropped, then recovered fast. He stayed on the sidelines waiting for another dip. Years passed. The rally continued. He missed it all. His logic wasn't wrong, but his rigidity was. Housel reminded us that you don't have to be right all the time. You just have to be right enough. And in most cases, staying invested beats trying to predict, because markets are noisy. But over time, they trend upward. Trying to outsmart them constantly only leads to stress, and worse, mistakes. One of the closing ideas of the book is about happiness. That money can't buy happiness directly, but it can buy independence, time, health, and freedom. And those things contribute deeply to happiness, but only if one is intentional. Buying time with money means choosing fewer hours of work for more hours with family. It means avoiding a longer commute by living closer to what matters. It means saying no to projects that rob your soul. Because time is the only asset we never get back. A man once retired early not because he was rich, but because he was deliberate. He reduced expenses. He redefined success. He walked away from more in pursuit of enough. And he never regretted it. Because he had time. He had stories, and he had no rush. Housel emphasized that people should use money to write their own life story, not someone else's script. Don't let trends dictate your decisions. Don't let comparisons steal your joy. Design a life that feels right, even if it looks different, because satisfaction is personal, and peace isn't found in more. It's found in alignment. The final reflection of the book was that everyone is playing a different game. Some trade daily. Some invest for decades. Some build businesses. Some preserve wealth. And each game has different rules, different timelines, different goals. So comparing yourself to others is foolish. It's like a sprinter comparing to a marathoner. The pace is different. So is the strategy. The only scorecard that matters is your own. What are you trying to do? Why? What matters most to you? Answering these questions brings clarity, and clarity brings calm. A man once shared that his greatest financial decision was not a stock. It was marrying the right partner. Because they aligned on values, on spending, on saving, on priorities. Together, they avoided conflict. They saved more. They enjoyed simple things. And their harmony amplified wealth more than any investment ever could. Money touches every area of life. So financial health supports emotional health, relationships, purpose, even identity. And that's why the psychology of money matters more than spreadsheets. It's not about formulas. It's about behavior. And behavior is deeply human, flawed, beautiful, messy, yet manageable. Through awareness, through patience, through kindness toward others and yourself. In conclusion, Morgan Housel didn't write a book about finance. He wrote a book about life, about why we do what we do with money, and how those decisions shape our days, our futures, our peace, and ultimately, our stories. This was the final part of the storytelling-style audiobook script for The Psychology of Money. If you'd like, I can now prepare this for voiceover or narration formatting. Or shall we begin the next audiobook script? In the end, wealth isn't about luck. It's about behavior. It's about patience when others panic. It's about understanding yourself before you try to understand the market. Morgan Housel showed us that the real game of money is played in the mind. If this changed how you think, even a little, then you've already taken your first step toward financial wisdom. Subscribe to Thinknova, where we decode the mindset of success, one story at a time. Because real wealth starts from within.